What's more interesting is that most of the water seems to be used for industrial purposes. And, that goes for rural communities that use a lot of water and agricultural practices. So, budgeting your water, it's complex. It's complex.
They've had to enact, starting on June 1st, they enacted a policy which started restricting water for commercial properties, industrial properties, to sort of reduce the amount of water usage, because they found out that with the mega drought that they've had now for the third year, that they were going to run out of water.
And nothing really happens. No new dams have been built in the state in 40 years. So when the city fathers of Fresno were laying out the parcels, a man named Faulkner was one of the originals, and this part of Fresno, they laid out essentially 1 acre lots from here, from the center of Fresno downtown going north. This particular piece of property had been unimproved since back in the late 1800s, because it was owned by a gentleman that lived across the street who actually purchased, I think he had 12 or 13 lots, and never sold them. So in 1999, 2000, I bought one of the lots, built my home, and then planted my vineyard.
Like if you go back to Southern California, where the reservoirs are full to the brim every year, regardless of any precipitation, any calculation of surface water entry, no matter what, the reservoirs are filled. I think industry has been extremely fortunate throughout history, because they've had just enough water, if not more than what they needed, to be successful in any business that's taken place in California. You could say that it started with gold mining. What was the next one is harvesting trees. And you think every industry that is boom and bust has had a telltale effect on the water conditions, water infrastructure since the beginning of time, since the first gold sluice box that was built.
I first became a homeowner back in the earlier 90s, and immediately there were not any significant issues that I noticed, but after several years there was more attention given to the water issue, and as a homeowner I was responsible for watering on certain days, limiting when I watered, and it became much more of an issue than what I was used to from Michigan.
My name is Cindy O'Quinn. I'm a meteorologist. I worked at WCPO in Cincinnati for 9 years, and most recently I worked for the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network through the University of Florida Digital Media Properties. There is really no beginning of the water cycle. It's just sort of always been there. And with the water cycle, so the water that was around when our great-great-grandparents were around is the same water that we're using today. It's the same water that was here when the dinosaurs were here. And basically, the sun is sort of the center and key piece to that, because with the sun, this causes evaporation. So you have the water from the oceans, the rivers, and the lakes that gets evaporated by the sun. And also you have over snowpacks like you have in California, you have direct sublimation where the snow and ice pack directly goes from the snow solid into the water vapor. But the sun does cause the evaporation, and then as this vapor is rising in the air, it actually starts to cool off and it condenses and forms the clouds that we see. And then as the clouds continue to get more of the vapor condensing into water droplets, then we actually get the clouds heavy enough that you see precipitation falling, and that's where we get our rain then.
But eventually it runs down the Sacramento River, the American River, San Joaquin River, right out into the bay, and it's gone, and we didn't get to use it. We could use it first and then put it back out into the bay, and there ought to be a happy medium where you can still meet the needs of the citizens of the state of California and still preserve. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against wildlife. I mean, I love creatures of all kinds, whether it happens to be salmon or ducks or the possums and the raccoons that are in my backyard. But there needs to be some common sense involved when it comes to how we manage the water that's in this state. And it's a political nightmare, as most people that are in a position to know would tell you. That is currently, it's essentially a stalemate, because what happens is when something gets started, it ends up in court, and then they fight for 20 years in either a state or a federal court, and nothing really happens. No new dams have been built in this state in 40 years. We need them. We need Temperance Flat, which would be above Friant. That's just one. There could be several others that would add a tremendous amount of water storage to the state of California and help solve the issue. And then in years when we do have a severe drought, it's not a question of, guess what? That $25,000 you spent on landscaping to make your yard look nice, you got to let that all die, because we don't have water for you to water your yard anymore. That's not the way it should work.
So about 3 years when I moved to this area of Fresno, it was roughly 3 years, and I personally didn't have any limitations, but it did affect the prices of hay that would go up because for our horses. Well, what happens is it affects everybody, especially in the state of California. The hay price goes up because it costs more to produce the hay. Okay. So within that, you still deal with your same buyers and whatnot here in the area. So we don't really have to outsource or go anywhere else. It just increases the price.
Yeah, I have a pool, and when I first moved to this house in 1996, again, it wasn't that big of an issue. But I would definitely gather a bunch of unwanted attention when I needed to drain my pool every few years. But I did it, called the city, need to get a permit. But I was still conscious that I am wasting a lot of water, and it's noticed by a lot of people. But then more recently, in the past 5 years or so, with the more severe water shortage, I'm at a point now where I'm very reluctant to even drain my pool, though I should probably for the health of the water and the maintenance of the pool. But I'm not interested in gaining that negative attention, and more importantly, I don't want to waste the water.
So I live in a kind of unique situation. I am in what's called a county island. So I'm technically not in the city of Fresno. So that restricts some of the things that we have access to. But about 25 years ago, the county came to the conclusion that they could not maintain the infrastructure for the water in this part of Fresno, and so they turned it over to the city of Fresno. So I essentially have city water as a utility, and along with that came a water meter, which up until the time I had purchased the house, every place else I had lived, no water meter. You paid a flat rate for water, $25, $30 a month, and you could use as much as you want.
If you're lucky enough to live in the places that have underground water sources, then you can have wells. But in Southern California, there's 29 different agencies that supply water to the area, and they supply it for over 27 million residents.
Throughout the day, budgeting how much water I use for certain activities, domestic uses. But what's more interesting is that most of the water seems to be used for industrial purposes. And, that goes for rural communities that use a lot of water and agricultural practices. So, budgeting your water, it's complex. It's complex. But it is extremely important given the time that we are in this water shortage.
Well, they've had to enact, starting on June 1st, they enacted a policy which started restricting water for commercial properties, industrial properties, to sort of reduce the amount of water uses, because they found out that with the mega drought that they've had now for the third year, that they were going to run out of water. The Colorado River has been shrinking in its water supply. You've had the extreme heat wave, and then you had a period of January through March where you had well below your normal amount of precipitation.
However, the catch-22 to all that is industry, water cutbacks in industry that's a last-minute proposition until like the last days, because nothing stands in the way of commerce. So I could say, domestically, the citizens of California, they are water conscious people through and through, from one end of the state to the other. Is the industry that is underway in California, are they conserving water? Well, I think that remains to be seen. I think it's been a boom and bust economy since it became a state in the union. You could talk about industries that have boomed and bust up and down. That's the way California has been throughout history. And see, now what you're going to see is the next bust. Water shortages, industries, you're going to see farms drying up, and they already are, or burning.
Places have a couple of days a week, but depending on if you're an odd number, an even number house, depends on which day you can. And through that, they've actually found that the first 3 weeks of June, they saw a reduction 5% greater than they thought they would actually see and were requiring the agencies to do.